All right, what's up everyone? I'm back at it again. It is full on springtime here in the high desert. It is the middle of April now, and daytime temperatures are up around 80 degrees. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was up here doing some work, and I noticed over the course of about 1 week, temperatures went up, and almost every single tree that I have in the ground started to leaf out. And certainly now virtually everything has begun to leaf out. This is one of my jujubes here. You can see it starting to sprout out. The only thing that hasn't really begun to leaf out yet are my figs and the pears. Those seem to be the two that are a little bit slow and late to begin leafing out, but it's really exciting to see everything finally starting to grow. You know, for the past 6 months or so since I've really been working and breaking ground and beginning to build this farm, it's been, you know, rolling. I started around September and really got rolling into October, November. Temperatures are going down, leaves are coming off, and not really much happened, you know, certainly throughout the winter time. With cold temperatures, all the leaves were off. They were just basically sticks in the ground, but now they're finally starting to come alive and put some growth on, so that's really exciting to see. I have all but 2 of my trees planted now. I have 2 more Montmorency sour cherries to put in, and other than that, that will complete all of my roughly 100 or so fruit and nut and pioneer trees that I'm planting throughout this farm that will complete the alley cropping system, bordering all of my field blocks, kind of enclosing everything where I want it to. And yeah, so that it was really kind of just in the nick of time that I got everything planted out. It was my intention to get all of my trees in the ground basically right around now. I wanted everything, since roughly all my trees are about the same size. Some of them are of larger trunk diameter and are taller, but they're roughly all, you know, bare root fruit trees around the same size. And I wanted everything to really begin establishing this year in the springtime, leafing out and rooting out at the same time, so that, you know, things are of approximate size to each other. I know certain species are going to grow faster than others, and hopefully like the pioneer species will grow certainly faster than others, but that's okay because like my mesquites and my pea shrubs are some of my smallest trees, so it's perfectly fine if they grow faster, and I kind of want them to catch up with everything else. But yeah, so that's kind of the progress update on the trees. So let's see, about 3 weeks ago I was up here planting trees and mulching them. That's the only thing that I'm still getting caught up on, and I just don't know if I'm gonna actually get everything mulched by the time that I get my cover crops going this summer, which is my cowpeas. But that's okay. A lot of things, probably a little over half, are mulched. I'll get some more this week. I have really noticed the benefits. I think mulch is definitely something that's focused on in regenerative agriculture and organic farming, gardening, stuff like that, but I think it's even underrated given the attention that it often gets. It just the moisture retention compared to, if you take, like, for instance, these mulch rings that I'm doing around my trees, the moisture retention between the bare soil and the soil that's underneath these drip rings. So for instance, I've been doing about a week on, week off up here working on the farm, so I will leave for a week, especially now that temperatures are up, 80-ish in the daytime, 50-ish at night, windy, dry, desert climate. I water my trees heavily before I leave, and I come back, and, you know, the ground just looks bone dry, like just beach sand, dusty, looks like there's no moisture in it at all. There is some moisture, you know, it's over the course of a week. It's usually a couple inches down, between 3 and 6 inches down. You can kind of kick the dirt aside and kind of find that darker moist layer. But as far as the mulch, like some of my thicker mulch rings that I've done, I can dig into those and I get wet mulch a couple inches down before I even get to the soil, and then the soil is like I watered it yesterday practically. It's crazy how much. It's just, it's an amazing technique for the moisture retention, the fact that it's essentially this permeable membrane that allows water through, but it keeps the sun off of the soil. It really prevents kind of any wind-related evaporation as far as the soil drying out. And then, of course, you know, being that you can keep your very surface soil moist, the soil microbiology tends to move higher in the soil. And in my home gardening career, I've really noticed that soil begins to kind of aggregate almost immediately right up to the soil surface. And a principal observation I've had is that the soil begins to be able to take on so much more water than it did pre-mulch, and I think that's really due to the promotion of soil aggregating microbes right up to the soil surface. Like, for instance, I will plant a perennial, a tree. I'll kind of dish it out so I can fill up a little dish of water around it to water it. You know, I begin to water it, immediately water begins pooling, and it just kind of sits there. You know, you have to stop watering to not overflow it, and it may take half an hour for that to slowly sink in. Whereas I move on to mulching that exact same plant in the exact same soil, a month or two later, you can just sit there with a hose full bore and it just takes on the water and takes on the water and takes on the water, and you basically almost can't get water to pool at all. So anyways, I love mulch. It's a fabulous technique. I really enjoy the utility of my little orange wood chipper and being able to recycle the brush that was here into kind of an organic amendment that I can improve the fertility and benefit my perennials. And then, of course, eventually the mulch begins to break down. Primarily funguses will break it down because they tend to like the woodier, or they are the microorganism that tends to break down woody stuff. And then eventually you're just left with an amazing, basically compost topsoil type thing. So really love the mulch. However, I don't know if I'm going to get everything mulched because it is quite time consuming, and I've already explained it's kind of unpleasant. I got to wear ear protection and full ceiling safety glasses and a respirator because it's just super dusty, but I love the end product. But I'm really it's been a whole juggle of prioritizing time-sensitive things and putting less time-sensitive things on the back burner. So really my two main priorities for this whole farm build, has been to get my trees in the ground by springtime, which as of today I will plant those 2 remaining cherries and all 100 trees are in the ground springtime, check mark. And then my other priority has been to get my field blocks cleared, leveled, and kind of prepared for the cowpea cover crop planting this summer. A little bit later, not exactly kind of that springtime cutoff threshold that I want for the trees. The cowpeas are really a hot weather crop. It's one of the reasons I chose them, because they can tolerate the incredibly hot temperatures that I have here in the summer. And so this is another lesson that I've learned almost identically to the clearing the brush process. is that it was just very unrealistic to expect to be able to do everything by hand. Now, I kind of came into this whole farm build, farm design, and goal oriented around seeing so many of the kind of minimal tools and implements, small urban farms that you see online. I really like the approach of using, kind of first and foremost hand tools whenever possible. There are a lot of small farms that are able to function entirely on hand tools. I like that. It's cheap, it's easy, it's quiet. You're not running either an electric motor or a gas motor. There's no fumes, cheap. And then maybe a step up from that would be maybe using a very small tractor or small power tools. So maybe you might use like the Johnny's tilther, or some sort of small electric, tools for various things, which I do intend to use extensively, because I'm building this entire farm off-grid, solar powered, battery powered. So to the extent that I can use electric tools, I am totally on board, and to every extent that I can, I will be using electric stuff. I love electric. And then the next step up from that would be like a small tractor, whereas like I have my BCS, much cheaper, certainly cheaper than a large tractor, much more maneuverable, so you can use it in smaller areas. You can turn it around much tighter than you can a larger tractor. It's lighter. You're not compacting the soil. That's one big kind of problem people have begun to realize with certainly traditional agriculture. Using big heavy equipment, you get compaction problems. And when you're basically prioritizing soil health really above everything, something like compaction is a pretty major issue. So speaking of compaction, I had this kind of whole realization. I started trying to clear all my brush by hand, realized that was going to take way too long, realized that kind of the leveling of the soil profile and getting little high spots and low spots leveled out by hand, way too much work. And so I went from trying to do that by hand into using a tractor for a majority of the brush clearing, which was amazing. Drastically sped up the entire process. Wished I had done it from the get-go. And then I thought, okay, now all my field blocks are cleared. I'm going to go through and broad fork my field blocks to loosen the soil profile and to remove rocks, kind of the smaller ones that the tractor didn't unearth on its own. So I was out here about 2-3 weeks ago, and I started broad forking one of my field blocks. I did choose to do one of the 2 field blocks that I do know to be a bit more compacted and have this kind of just really aggressive compaction layer a couple inches down, and quickly realized that was completely impractical. I have a couple clips of me doing one of the lines on one of my beds, and it's almost impossible to get the broad fork down through this layer. Like it feels and even sounds like you're on rock, because it's basically just like this kind of mixture of the sandy soil with pea gravel just compacted into something that clods up into something almost exactly like a rock. I'm technically able to break it up with the broad fork, but it's just way too time consuming. It took me probably an hour and a half to do one run down 100-foot field block. So that's the equivalent of like one bed's worth, and I have 50. So 50 times 1.5, I'm looking at probably 2 weeks, and like I can't broad fork like that for 8 hours a day. Like, and especially I would get to these points where I'm into the hard pan, and I pull the broad fork back, and I can practically like do dips with my body off the ground on the handles, at the end of the handles, trying to break up the compaction layer. Way too much work. I do think and hope and plan on managing kind of my soil loosening with the broad fork moving forward, but for this kind of time sensitive task of getting my soil loosened up for the cowpea planting and then whatever I choose to use as a winter cover crop over the winter, and then the resulting moving into vegetable production about a year from now, I need to get stuff loosened up. And so I chose to buy a subsoiler. So I did a little bit of research, quickly stumbled upon the entire practice of subsoiling, which is basically just either one or a series of very large ripping blades that you put on a tractor. The tractor that I am borrowing and borrowed before does have a box blade, and it does kind of have the array of ripping blades that you can put down, and I did already rip everything, but that was only to maybe 6 or 8 inches. So did a little bit of research, couldn't find a used subsoiler, and anyways ended up buying this Gearmore, I forget the model name, subsoiler. It was $900, and I am probably only going to use it today and tomorrow and will never use it again. But that is just how much work it was to broad fork that one line of one field block. The time savings that it should afford me are going to be worth the $900 for this single task of breaking everything up. I also hope and expect that it will bring rocks to the surface and kind of allow me to continue the de-rocking process. I'm sure when I do get around to broad forking the field blocks, I may, like after I crop out the cowpeas, either mow them or pull them out at the end of the summer, I might choose that opportunity to get in there and broad fork a little bit. I'm not sure if I'll have the time to do everything, but the broad fork is great for pulling out smaller rocks, and when it comes to using kind of the standard seeders like the Jang, and I have a couple of other seeders that I'm going to experiment around with. You know, you really need at least that first few inches of soil profile to be de-rocked and soft and everything like that. So anyways, that's kind of the update for right now. I have box bladed my field blocks with the tractor, and just to get them a little bit leveled out, and then I'm going to try to hook up this subsoiler and get on to ripping all my field blocks today and tomorrow. I expect it will take quite a few hours, but I'm really looking forward to getting to use it and seeing how it does for pulling the rocks out. And then it's going to be rip everything, put the box blade back on and level everything out. And then I'm going to be back up here in a week, and I have my soil amendments that I'm going to put in the ground. I don't think I've really talked in depth about that. In my first video, I was explaining how it's my intention to use cover crops primarily to build my soil fertility and organic matter and all that. I did a soil test that I collected in my first video almost 6 months ago, and it came back pretty much about what I expected. Very low in organic matter. It was basically 0.4% organic matter, so as far as organic farming goes, that's like close to zero. But that's to be expected. I mean, you can see it. It's very blonde, sandy soil, and due to the fact that we maybe get 6 inches of rain here annually, there's just not that turnover of native vegetation to grow and decompose to build up native soil organic matter. But that's to be expected, and that's something that I can immediately address with cover crops and amendments. Nitrogen very low, super low to be expected, no surprise there. Phosphorus and potassium were very high. They were like right at the desired value level. And so that was good. That's good. I'm not gonna have to worry about potassium and phosphorus for now. So that's the NPK. And then cations and stuff were good. They were all pretty much at the desired value levels. Trace minerals were pretty good across the board. 2 trace minerals, zinc and boron, were on the low end. And then pH was super high. I think it was like 8.2, also to be expected. So no big surprises there. A lot of work to do as far as getting that organic matter up, nitrogen up, and that's all going to come with the just increasing soil biology and getting organic matter and plant roots and plant residues into the ground. I have kind of tempered my expectations and goals a little bit around building my soil fertility all from the get-go with cover crops. I certainly have the aspiration of at least maintaining my soil fertility with cover crops going forward. I would like, my goal is to, with everything as far as inputs, electricity, water, everything coming into the farm, I want to source and build as much as I can here on the farm. So to the extent that I can reduce importing soil amendments, I want to do that. But I have come to the realization that since my soil organic matter is so low and kind of compounded and overlaid with the fact that I really need to start making money off of this farm about a year from now, I'm okay with putting down organic amendments potentially quite heavily in these first couple years to really just put the paddles to this thing and get it jump started and everything kind of off to the races, and then work on reducing those inputs and just keeping the ball rolling with cover crops and stuff like that. So as far as amendments, my goal is to really just kind of mimic what, if I had a time machine and I could go back 5 years, I would just grow copious amounts of year-round cover crops, mow and incorporate them into the soil. And I think, based off of what I know about soil fertility and soil management practices, that would do the trick as far as building, I think if I could roll back the clock, start growing cover crops a long time ago, I would have good soil now, but I can't do that. So really what I'm going to do is just kind of mimic that. So cover crops being beneficial for the soil due to 2 primary reasons. That's the just simple plant residues, roots and above ground stuff decomposing in the soil, feeding the soil food web, getting decomposed and getting recycled, and then the kind of root exudates and sugars that and carbohydrates that the plants would be pushing out into the soil via their roots to further feed the soil food web that then feeds them. So I'm going to mimic that process by taking basically plant residues. So in my instance here, what was readily available to me and at a good price was a soybean meal. It's just a straight soybean meal, organic certified product. It's like a 712 on the NPK, but more important than that, it's just organic certified. It's basically, to my knowledge, what is just left over after the oil pressing process of making soybean oil. There's a waste product left over, happens to be good for amending soil. So I have 500 pounds of soybean meal that I'm going to put down. That's kind of the recommended application for an acre, which I'm working on here. I am going to be fertilizing both my tree rows and the field blocks evenly. And then so that's going to basically mimic, hopefully get me close to, it's not ideal. Like I said, ideally I would go back in time and I would grow cover crops, but I can't. So I'm going to take the soybean meal, incorporate that into the soil. That will hopefully be as close to getting the benefit of having grown soybeans last year here. And then so that's going to kind of cover organic matter and nitrogen. So nitrogen and organic matter were low. I'm going to get that from the soybean meal. Zinc and boron were a little low on the trace mineral analysis that I got. And so again, to kind of mimic natural processes and to draw from what I've read a lot about in the regenerative soil farming movement domain, and that is for trace minerals. I'm going to be using a rock dust, and that's azomite. I'm sure anybody who's familiar with the principle of using rock dusts to remineralize soil is familiar with azomite. It's like the go-to, most widely distributed, available most places rock powder. It's this volcanic ash deposit that they pull out of the ground in Utah. It's very high in a broad range of trace minerals, so that will hopefully both give me a short and long-term boost to kind of all my trace minerals. And then I'm going to put down some kelp meal as well. That's kind of both. It's both just organic matter, plant material, and fairly high in a few of the trace minerals. And there seems to be maybe some potential benefit to a few like plant hormones that kelp has. I've seen some debate online about the efficacy of that in field trials and greenhouse trials. But again, so everything's organic certified, so it's just rock dust, soybean, and kelp into the ground. I have a spreader, the fertilizer spreader, kind of like for fertilizing big lawns and stuff, that I'm going to use to distribute everything. And then I'm going to harrow it in with my BCS. That's really the best incorporation tool that I have. It should kind of get that stuff fairly distributed in the top 5-6 inches of the soil profile. And then I'm going to spray organic blackstrap molasses in kind of a fertigation style method. And so that's going to kind of mimic the root exudates, the sugars and carbohydrates that live plants would be or would have afforded the soil had I been growing cover crops over the past few years. And that's also really just to, put the pedal to the metal as far as getting my soil microbiome, microorganisms just revved up as much as possible, and hopefully stimulate them to the extent that they will more quickly digest and break down those amendments that I'm also putting down with them. So that's kind of my fertilization, fertility strategy right now. I'm going to put all that down before I do my cowpeas. I don't really expect the stuff to be that bioavailable immediately to help the cowpeas, but cowpeas, being a nitrogen fixing crop, supposedly work quite well on their own in poor soils anyways. So it's really just getting the stuff into the ground so that it can begin decomposing and benefit future cover crops and future cash crops. And then irrigation. I have a box of 90 wobblers. Anybody who's in the market gardening space, wobblers kind of the gold standard as far as a sprinkler. Everything's going to be overhead. I'll probably talk about... All right, I hit my 30-minute clip cutoff. I didn't realize I was talking for that long. Sorry, I'm kind of long-winded with these sometimes, but yeah, so just to tie everything up, the next 6 months-ish is going to be starting today, subsoil my field blocks, level them back out with the box blade, plant my last 2 cherries. That'll be all my trees in. Get my soil amendments spread and incorporated. That'll happen next week. Get my irrigation set up. I have my wobblers and everything. I'll talk about that design later. And then middle of May, which is about a month from now, get my cowpeas spread, get them growing, and water them daily, just about, of which I'll have all the wobblers set up to do that. And then it will be kind of just a few months of sitting back and watching the cover crops grow. It's going to be covering everything, both the tree rows at the bases of the trees and the field blocks, so I won't even be walking through here all that much aside from to turn sprinkler lines on and off. And then it'll give me a little bit of time to kind of step back and focus on some perimeter stuff here. So I've had my fence parts sitting here waiting for quite a while now. I'll get my fence built, front gate and everything. I've got a sign I'm going to put out front. Finally do my shipping container. I have some plans being made for the slab that I'm going to put it on, and get that thing all decked out and in place and everything. And yeah, it'll be kind of a nice little respite from the kind of hard labor stuff that I've been doing, the tree planting, the brush removal, and everything like that. And yeah, so that's kind of the status update for right now. I'm going to try to figure out how to get this subsoiler on the tractor and spend the day subsoiling. Alright, so after about a combined day, starting midday one day, finishing midday the next day, I'm done with the subsoiler. It was an absolutely amazing tool to use. I'm super glad I got it. Totally worth the basically one-time $900 use of this thing. It saved me so much work with the broad fork to get my soil loosened up for my cover crops this summer. It worked really great for pulling a lot of rocks out. It surfaced a lot of rocks, and I would continually hop out of the tractor and toss them to the side, and then eventually come by with the bucket of the tractor, toss all the rocks into the bucket, and go and add to my various rock piles. I did hit a couple really large rocks in which I marked for my tractor guy to come by with his backhoe attachment to pull those out, because they were too big for me to even kind of wiggle out of the ground. I would hit rocks where it would just full on stop the tractor. There was no way of continuing on. I'd have to lift the shank back up. But I really love this thing. I'm basically going to give it to my tractor guy to have for any jobs he needs. I'll be able to use it in the future if I need it. Maybe I will use it next year or at some point in the future, but it was really just this first time breaking up of the hard pan that presumably took many years to accumulate, and due to the fact that I'm going to be continually growing things, especially with a high rotation of cover crops and deep-rooted crops, I don't, and the fact that I'm not going to be running any heavy machinery over anything, I just don't expect, I can't foresee a situation in which the hard pan would reaccumulate. So it's basically loosened up now, and just going forward I'll be able to manage my beds, loosening them with a broad fork. But totally worth it. As I had previously noted, due to my little bit of broad forking I did do, these rear two field blocks that I have way more rocks in them and were way more compacted than my front two. My front two field blocks were beautiful. They are basically just thick sand. I could tell there was a little bit of compaction layer, and it was good that I did rip them, but I was able to push the shank to full depth, which is about 20 inches, which is deeper than a broad fork. Even the big meadow creature is 16 inches, so this does provide a loosening of a depth of loosening of the soil profile that you can't get with any available broad fork. And even if you had a 20-inch broad fork, even in the loosest soils, it'd probably be pretty hard to get it to pitch over and to loosen it up. But anyways, so my front two field blocks, really nice and sandy and fairly loose to begin with. Very few to no rocks. In fact, my front field block, I hit no perceptible rocks whatsoever. My rear one, I hit a couple, pulled those out, no big deal. Was able to get the shank to full depth. And really, after doing it for a couple hours, I realized that what I chose to do for all my field blocks was basically just do about an 18 to 24 inch spacing of full length ripping. And after maybe an hour or so, I realized that just backing up the length of the field block and then dropping the shank and going again was kind of the easiest way of doing it, as opposed to lots of shifting of the tractor and doing 180s at the ends. And it also would allow me to, if I drove over the area that I ripped, I couldn't see that line anymore. So I would rip it down one length, and then as I was backing up, I would kind of get out of the way to preserve that line, so I could line up the next one to be, roughly that far away. And so it's not quite, it's not quite the total breaking. It's not the density of soil loosening and breaking that you could get with a broad fork, because the broad fork tines are like 4 inches apart. I don't think it's that important. Really, my goal is just to, where it was particularly compacted, to get fracturing and breaking of the hard pan so that roots can find their way down. I'm making the assumption and decision that something in the order of a 2-foot spacing is good. As plant roots go down, if they did happen to hit any remaining portion of the hard pan, they could go laterally and then find their way down through that into the profile. And then hopefully and presumably over time, the lateral roots will work their way through and break up any of the remaining compaction. And just in my research online, it seemed like a 20-inch or 24-inch spacing on the shanks was good. The big implements that you can get for massive tractors that have rows of these are roughly a 2-foot spacing. So I did break the shear bolt twice. So this front bolt on the shank is designed to break to basically prevent any damage to the implement or the tractor itself, because this tool can provide an incredible amount of leverage on the tractor itself, just due to the depth. And when you hit rocks, you would prefer this bolt to break, and when it does break, this whole blade just swings back and pivots around the rear bolt. I snapped the first one and then had to go to the hardware store and get a few more, and and I thankfully estimated that I would probably break a couple more, so I got 3 bolts. This is my second bolt I've put in there, and this current bolt is actually quite bent. It's probably not too far from breaking, but you can push it pretty damn hard before that thing breaks. I was on my first bolt break, I was getting a little bit too aggressive trying to lever some rocks out, and realized that it's just not the best way of doing that. So whenever I would hit a rock, so I kind of decided to start throttling back on the tractor a little bit, go a little bit slower. When I did hit a rock that would just full stop the tractor and I could tell it wasn't going to come out, I would lift the shank, pull forward slightly, hop out, and kind of uncover wherever that rock was and kind of flag it for my backhoe guy to come in and pull it out. So yeah, so front 2 field blocks went great. I feel really good about those. Full depth, 2-foot spacing all the way down, great. My rear 2 field blocks, a lot more rocks, like a drastic change in the amount of rocks and just the texture, a lot more of kind of the aggressive hard pan, and there's kind of this, there's a fairly large area that is kind of overlapping in 2 of my field blocks where it feels like I'm almost on bedrock, which has me a little worried. I can't quite tell if it's just a really aggressive hard pan or if it is in fact bedrock. One kind of cool thing about having driven this thing around for a day and having sliced through all of my soil, it gives you a very kind of tactile sense of what's going on in the soil, you know, that you're driving over, and what areas are more compacted and where the rocks are clustered and stuff like that. Yeah, so there was this area in my rear 2 field blocks where no matter what I did, I could not get the shank more than maybe 2/3 depth, which is okay. I mean, that's approaching that basically is the 14-inch depth of the broad fork, but it sounded like it was just dragging across rock. Basically, it sounded very crispy and tinny, and I even ended up hanging. I have these 2. I have 50 pounds hung on the front of my BCS for a counterweight for the harrow, and when I was having trouble getting full depth on my 2 field blocks here, I actually hung another 50 pounds on here just to give it a little bit more oomph going through. And I also adjusted the top link on the tractor to get the blade angle proper. I did a little research and learned that these are actually very much designed to have a specific geometry so that they really pull themselves down into the soil, and that they're all basically designed to basically have this backside here, or the kickstand's perfectly vertical when the shank is in the ground, basically making this vertical when it's in. And for my first few hours, I had it pitched a little bit too forward and ended up shortening the top link, getting it nice and vertical, hanging some weight on it, and it did seem to improve my depth of ripping on my kind of 2 more trebled field blocks. And yeah, so got a lot of rocks out, didn't quite get to full depth throughout these rear 2 field blocks. I spent probably about twice as much time. I basically did them twice. So I attempted to do the 2-foot spacing of ripping down these 2, and then went back through and did it again just to try to, since I could tell they were so much more compacted, and just trying to get through it. And it did seem like there was an area that was just simply a quite aggressive hard pan. I did finally get through most of that, got mostly to full depth through a lot of it, but there was just this area that feels like kind of a bedrock situation, which has me a little worried about, you know, what plants are going to do above that if I truly only have a foot or 16 inches of soil before they're just hitting impenetrable rock. That's not going to go over so well, but we'll see. It may just be a very aggressive hard pan that eventually, you know, some of the more aggressive rooting crops will work their way through and break up. So yeah, so that's it. Really happy that I got this thing, really glad that I used it, and I put the box blade back on the tractor, and I've begun smoothing out the field blocks, and now 2 of them are totally ready for planting. I'm so excited. It feels like a long time coming, having gotten to this point where now the brush is clear, the ground is level, it's now, the profile is ripped down to a good depth to loosen the soil up, and 2 of them are ready for planting. I'm hopefully going to get my tractor guy in here to pull some of the big rocks out of my back 2 field blocks here, and then I'll also box blade those, put a little bit of water down with my sprinkler to keep the dust down, and everything will basically be ready for planting. So in a week I will bring the rest of my amendments up here, spread them, incorporate them with the BCS and the harrow, and I'm off to the races, ready to plant, ready to irrigate, and ready to get going. Okay, so I don't think I've done this yet. I'm going to do a quick rundown of all of the trees that I've planted and am going to have here. Like I said, I have 2 more cherries to toss in, and then I'm done. That's all the trees that are going to be bordering the field blocks here, and for the foreseeable future, all the trees that I'm going to have. So from the top, figs. I have 5 Chicago hardy figs. Those are, from everything that I can tell, the most cold hardy fig available, and I think that's definitely needed here due to the occasional risk of kind of a really hard freeze. I'm technically zone 8 here, but I could definitely touch like a zone 7 or 6 low every once in a while. So 5 Chicago hardy figs. Pomegranates, I have 5 AC Sweet. Those are from Dave Wilson, described on their website as being one of the most cold hardy varieties they sell, supposedly developed in Salt Lake City, which if is the case, then I'm golden because it's colder there than it is here. 5 Salavatsky pomegranates. That's like another Russian variety, supposedly quite cold hardy. And then 2 Kazaki Russian pomegranates. That's another cold hardy variety. Jujubes, I have 4 Li, or Lee, I'm not sure which it is. One of the most common garden variety jujubes that you can find at most nurseries and stuff. It's just supposed to be a great eating size, on the bigger size of a jujube, and self-pollinating, which laying is supposedly not. And yeah, just by the description looked good. And then I have 3 of these Chang jujubes, which are supposedly a unique variety that has been kept in propagation by this guy that I got from this small little backyard nursery here in Southern California. Thus far appears visually to be about the same as Lai, so all right, so those are the jujubes. Apples, I have 4 Arkansas black spur apples. Those were supposed to be a late blooming variety. 2 pink ladies. Those are, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with pink ladies. It's a really common apple. It's one I really like myself. Was listed as a mid-season bloom, which hopefully is late enough to avoid frosts here. 2 Liberty apples. Those were a late blooming variety from Dave Wilson, and then 2 Red Rome Beauty, which were a mid-late season bloom variety. Again, that was probably my first and foremost criteria for variety selection throughout all the species I'm growing here. As long as it physically fit the zone, as could survive here, then I wanted something that was late blooming due to the late frost risk. And actually, case in point, right now, like it has been very warm over the past few days, but last night it was pretty cold, maybe like high 40s, 48-ish, maybe 45. Here 8 in the morning, still kind of cold. I've got a big jacket on. It's definitely not frosting, but it could a little bit. That's kind of the characteristic of the high desert. Things start warming into spring, and then it will dip back. It can dip back down into quite cold, potentially freezing. That's when you kill off your blossoms and you lose your crop for the year. So late blooming for everything. Apricots, 3 Harcots, supposed to be late blooming and very hardy, and then also 3 Chinese apricots. Peaches, 4 Reliance, 4 Frost, and 4 Canadian Harmony, all of them listed as late blooming and had a good description as far as taste profile and everything. Looked good to me. Nectarines, 4 Arctic Glow, 4 Goldmine, again late blooming, looked good, looked tasty. Cherries, 4 Montmorency, which is actually it's going to be 6 now because I have 2 more to put in today. That's a sour cherry, and based off of my research, there are a lot of late blooming sour cherries, but I could only really find 1 readily available late blooming sweet cherry, and that's Craig's Crimson. So I have 6 Montmorency, which are the sours, 4 Craig's Crimson, which are the sweets. Mulberries, I have 1 sweet lavender mulberry, that's a white mulberry. 2 Illinois Everbearing mulberry, and then 2 Oscars mulberry. And I'm really excited for those. I've had mulberries in the past. I love them. They're kind of unique, you know. They're common. I've actually never even seen them commercially available aside from a farmer's market because their shelf life is so short that I don't even know how a commercial grower could get them to a grocery store in a condition in which they would last more than like 2 days. But I really like them myself. And they're kind of unique through my whole fruit variety selection. I want unique stuff, you know. I don't want plain vanilla stuff you can buy at a store. That's why would I do that? And thus far, the mulberries have been leafing out very aggressively, maybe even more than just about everything, which has been really exciting. And the mulberries that I have, they're very small. I mean, they're about pencil diameter stalk, so it's not like they were really big trees going in, but they're pushing out a lot of vigor so far, and I like that, and I'm excited to have them. So looking forward to that. Pears, 2 Barlette and 2 Bosque. I think the Bosque was the late blooming one that looked good, but it needed no. The Barlette was the late blooming variety that looked good, and then it required a pollinator, so I got Bosque, which I think what was described as the America's most common pear. Pawpaws, so I've never had a pawpaw. Really kind of got my fingers crossed I can pull them off in this climate. I couldn't find any really solid information about what environment they like growing in the most. They are native throughout a fairly large range here in North America, but I don't think over here in the kind of dry, arid West So the soil type might not be the most conducive to them, but they are leafing out. I mean, they're very tiny. They're these little grafted things that were like 8 inches tall in a little tiny like 2x2 pot, and they're leafing out. I put those in tree tubes. In my earlier videos I was explaining, I think I had stated that I was going to use a lot of tree tubes. I ended up not using that many. I have like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them so far. I actually ended up pulling them off a couple of the trees that I first planted here because I just didn't see the need. I think they're going to benefit some of the really small tender stuff that I have. Like a couple of my pea shrubs are like half pencil diameter and like yay tall, and they could get eaten down by a rabbit or something. And just for a little bit of wind protection and a little bit of it's supposed to create a greenhousing effect, so I expect to have the tubes off of everything at least mid to late summer here, but I'm just kind of playing it by ear with those. But some of the really tiny stuff like the pawpaws and the pea shrubs, I think it's a good idea to have those on them. So okay, yeah, so for the pawpaws I have 2 mango and 1 sunflower. Those are just the names. It appears there's not that many kind of cultivated varieties of them. You can get generic, just random seedlings, but then I guess some of them have been selected for cultivation because they make particularly good fruit or whatever. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think the sunflower needed a pollinator, but the mangoes were described as being self-fruitful. So I have a mango and a sunflower together down here for pollination, and then I have one on its own. Plums, not a huge plum fan myself. Maybe I've just not had the chance to try a really good plum, so I only did 2 of those. I did 1 beauty and 1 superior, both listed as late blooming. And so that's it for the fruit. For nuts, I have 2 Chandler walnuts, which are supposed to be a fairly plain vanilla standard garden variety walnut. It's supposed to be a heavy producer, popular for commercial propagation. Actually, sorry, I only have 1. I ended up not only having room for 1. So I have 1 Chandler and I have 2 Robert Livermore, which are this red walnut. It's actually got like a red skin on the walnut itself after you crack the nut open. So looking forward to those. And those I kind of have in this little triangular area in the back here on their own. Those are going to be much larger trees. They're recommended at a 25-foot spacing, whereas all the rest of my fruit trees are on 15-foot spacing. So I kind of gave them a little bit more room in the back here, and that's the one area where I'll probably play around with like some multi-tiered understories of maybe some berries and I don't know, like a really traditional food forest back underneath those walnuts. And then almonds, I have 2 all-in-one almonds. Those are planted in my tree rows, 15-foot spacing with the rest of the fruit trees. By the description, it sounds like I can keep them to the appropriate size for that. And then the rest are just my pioneer trees, which are my mesquites. I have 3 screwbean mesquites, 3 honeys, 4 mimosa trees, and then like 4 or 5 of the Siberian pea shrubs. And that's the full count, 96 trees. I think that's almost exactly everything that I have planted. And yeah, so that's all the fruit that I'm going to have here on the farm. And I'm really looking forward to the varieties that I chose, in particularly kind of the unique stuff like the jujubes and the mulberries, and especially the pawpaws and stuff, and then the Russian pomegranates. Looking forward to those. I'm looking forward to everything, but I'm really happy that I went with the alley cropping system, and I'm happy that I learned from past mistakes with home gardening, not really focusing only on annual stuff and not getting perennials in the ground early to get them established. But I've learned from that, and from the get-go here it's been perennials first, annuals later. And basically over the course of this one winter, all my trees are in the ground. Now rolling into spring, pretty much everything's leafing out, and I'm really excited to have some fruit here in the next couple of years. So I'll do a quick walk around and show you what's leafing out so far. Okay, so this is actually one of my Salavatsky pomegranates in one of these tree tubes here. All the other Salavatskys that I have are not in tree tubes, and the leaves are much more dark red and purple. But this one, since it's in the tree tube and presumably a lot warmer with the greenhousing effect, is a lot more green down there. So a little bit of an interesting experiment. I'm sure it's going to be growing aggressively here, and as soon as it seems like it's getting constricted there in the tree tube, I'll pull it off, which may only be a month or two from now, but it's doing well in there. And yeah, so that's the Salavatsky. So here is one of the Montmorency cherries starting to leaf out here. One of the first ones that I planted. This was actually a potted one, not one of the bare roots, but seems to be doing just fine. Leafing out, looking good. And here's another one of the Chang jujubes, looking really good, sprouting out from just about all of the lateral branches. Really excited for these. I actually ended up topping them. They came very tall in these little like 2-gallon something pots. And just due to the winds up here, and just the 15-foot spacing and everything that I have here, I wanted to try to coax them into a little bit of a bushier stature, or not bushier, just wider, shorter tree. I know they tend to naturally want to grow up these very tall, slender trees. So anyways, looking really good. Okay, so here's one of the AC Sweet pomegranates, one of the first few trees that I planted here. Looking really good. It got an early mulch ring, so it's stayed nice and moist in there this whole time. Leafing out very nicely. Nice and waxy leaves. Looking really good. Looking forward to those. All right, this is one of the Oscars mulberries. And like I was just explaining, it is doing really good. All of the mulberries, aside from one, but it is starting to bud out finally, are very aggressively leafing out. And I'm really excited to see that. And they're just little stalks. So I'm impressed, and I'm excited because it's something I really wanted to succeed here. And by all descriptions, I think it will do pretty well here. And they're even putting berries out already. These, come on. These little berries here. It's putting those out already. Oscars, by the description, is supposed to be like the connoisseur's mulberry. So excited for those. I have 2 of these, and they're both doing really well. Okay, so this is the Kazaki Russian pomegranate. It's supposed to be very cold hardy. They came somewhat leafed out like this, so I haven't seen all that much change so far, but they're looking good. Small plants, but I think I've seen a little bit of growth since I've put them in. Okay, I'm realizing now that I did not amend my tree list with my last couple tree orders. It was such a kind of scattershot attempt to get all the varieties that I wanted from all these different mail order nurseries, and a lot of them came back at me with emails saying my order was complete, but they didn't have enough for whatever quantity I ordered, so I'd have to go back in and order from a different nursery, and sometimes I didn't realize that they'd done that until the order had showed up. So anyway, this is a Spartan apple, one that I didn't mention. Supposed to be late blooming, good variety, I think self-pollinating. This is from Burnt Ridge Nursery. Come on. Yeah, but this one has already begun to leaf out. I think it had a couple leaves on it maybe when it showed up, but it has already begun leafing out and is looking quite good. Here's another one of the Oscars mulberries. Looking very healthy. Really happy about that. And also putting berries out already. How cool is that? And like I said, only about pencil diameter or so far. But looking really good. Okay, so this is one of my Chicago hardy figs, and this is the one that I can tell is still alive, and it is just starting to bud out here. It's got a few of these little nodes where it's pushing out some signs of life, so I'm happy about that. I expect this one to survive, but I have a couple other ones that are looking very crispy and no real signs of life, and I'm not so sure they're gonna take. But like I said, I'll give them a couple months to see if they do or not. But this one definitely seems like it has taken, so I'm happy about that. I really want to try some figs up here, and I think this variety should do okay if I can get it to root out. And this is one of the Illinois mulberries, also leafing out quite aggressively and looking really good, and also putting some little tiny micro berries out, so that's cool to see. Yeah, all of the mulberries, aside from one, but it is starting to just bud out now, are looking really good and healthy and seem to be enjoying the climate up here. Okay, so this is one of my mesquites, and I actually can't tell you if this is one of the screw beans or the honeys. But they drop all their leaves in the winter. And interestingly enough, it dropped all of its spikes, thorns, these native North American native mesquites all have these very massive thorns on them, and that's actually one reason that people tend to go for the Chilean variety for landscaping purposes, because it's thornless. But along with its leaves, this one dropped all of its thorns, but has since started to leaf out, and it's very purple right now compared to the green leaves that it had last year. And that seems to just be a plant attribute about cold tolerance. I've noticed plants tend to have a bit more red and purple in them when it's cold. But yeah, they're leafing out, and I expect those to do quite well. They're supposed to be really hardy and fast growing and everything. And I guess this is one thing I forgot to mention on my list too. All of my mimosas and mesquites, I have planted a Concord grape at the base of them in an attempt to grow the Concord grape up the eventual pioneer tree. So we'll see how that strategy works, and no real signs of life from any of the Concords thus far. Alright, this is one of the Arkansas Black Spur apples. Looking very good, getting lots of sproutage from all the lateral branches. Looking real nice. So this is one of the Pink Lady apples. It leafed out fairly quickly, small little leaves and a couple of little flower buds, and then I noticed I came by a couple days ago and all the leaves were very, very crispy, and I was able to just kind of break them off. The plant's definitely not dead. It's still got moisture in the wood there, but a little bit on the concerned list with this one. I'm not sure what that... It may have just been a weird... the plant might have just been kind of confused about what climate it was in. It probably was in, well, I had it down south in a warmer environment for a little bit, might have been indoors for a bit, and thought that it was warm enough to leaf out, and then it came up here and was fairly cold for a few nights, and decided to get rid of its leaves. But we'll see if this one pulls through. My other pink lady over here is doing fine, so that's a little weird, but again, I'll give it a few months, see how it does, and if it looks like it's not coming through, then I'll replace it. Here's one of the all-in-one almonds, and just the very beginnings of signs of life here. Little buds coming out, green and flexible shoots, so seems to be doing just fine, just a little slower than some of the other varieties. Here's one of the Craig's Crimson sweet cherries, looking real good, putting some leaves out here at the base, interestingly a little bit more than the top. A couple little sprouts up top here, but mostly down at the base, and my few other ones seem to be doing the same thing, but healthy waxy leaves, looking good. And here's one of my Li Li jujubes, and this one is just starting to put out some signs of life here, so that's a good sign. All but one of my lies are leafing out and looking good. So here is one of my Concord seedless grapes from Stark Bros, planted at the base of a mimosa tree that is just starting to leaf out here. I found these at a nursery. I don't even think they were intending on selling them in the pot size that I grabbed. I kind of saw their propagation area and saw these couple little mimosas in like 1 gallons. And they said they'd sell them to me if I wanted them, and I think I got a pretty good deal on them. I think they're like $10 or something like that because they're so small. But being that they are such a fast growing tree and going to be my kind of pioneer varieties, I was fine with getting these kind of small. So yeah, looking good. They have a nice mulch ring, keeping them nice and moist, and I'm very excited and hopeful about my strategy of growing the Concord grapes up the pioneer trees, so we'll see how that does. Okay, so here is one of my pawpaws in a tree tube, just starting to push out some leaves down there, and I'm happy about that. Any signs of life from these I'll take, and yeah, looking good. Another mulberry. This is one of the one and only sweet lavender variety that I have. Again, looking really nice. Nice thick leaves, and given that it's only about a pencil diameter plant, I'm happy about how it's looking so far. I have noticed some of the birds have come through and taken a few pecks at these, maybe just because they look so appetizing, but they don't seem to be any worse for the wear. Here is one of my other pawpaws, and I actually can't tell you what variety it is because the plant tag is down in the tree tube there with it. But this is my best looking one so far. Got some decent leaves coming out, and these are very, very tiny trees. They're half pencil diameter or so, and maybe only 8 inches tall. So I'm happy to see that they have some signs of life. Okay, so here's the Chang jujube starting to sprout out here. The jujubes are a pretty cool tree. They have this very like zigzag formation. It's like they have these little nodes, and at the end of every node they like make a turn, and you can see it throughout the whole trunk here. It's just like up at an angle like that, and I just enjoy the look, and they have these very glossy leaves, and yeah, looking forward to those. Got 3 of these Chang jujubes. Okay, so this is a violet fig. Actually, that's one I forgot to include on the list there. So I guess I have 97 trees. I only have one of these. Supposed to be quite a cold hardy variety. I'm a little concerned about the look of this one, and actually a couple of my Chicago hardies are not looking so well. I have one that is very obviously starting to leaf out and bud out. Figs are supposed to be one of the harder trees to establish. I've actually noticed on quite a few websites and nurseries that's one of the few varieties that they will not warranty for guaranteed like leafing out and establishment. So we'll see. I kind of expect to have to replace maybe a couple of the trees that I've planted due to just kind of failure to start growing. But you know, if I only have to replace maybe 5 or so, that means I have a 95% success rate, and I'm happy with that. So I suspect a couple of these figs I might need to replace, and if I do, I'm not so sure I will try another fig because I really want something that's going to be successful. So I might swap it out with something else, but I will give it another couple months and see how it's doing, and then reassess from there. My pear trees seem to be on the slower side of things to be leafing out. I don't really see any buds or leaves coming out of any of my pears, but I can tell that the branches are nice and green and flexible, and there's still life in there. So I think they're just going to be on the slower side every year to leaf out. Actually, I can. Oh no, that's not a leaf. Yeah, so I'll keep an eye on them, but I don't think anything's wrong with them. I think they're just a little slow to leaf out. Here is one of my other Salavatsky Russian pomegranates, and this one being not in a tree tube and having come back and forth with me from Southern California numerous times. There were quite a few trips where I told myself I'd be planting a whole bunch of stuff and brought up a whole bunch of trees and plants with me, and time got away from me and only ended up planting a few of them and ended up bringing them back. So these had quite the wild climate ride, going from warm to cold to warm to cold. But it is leafing out. It's got that strong red purple hue in the leaves, I think because it's thinking it's cold out, which it is kind of today. But also not being in a tree tube. The other one that has been up here this entire time in a tree tube has very green, lush leaves right now. But regardless, it's alive and it's putting leaves out, so I think it'll do just fine. All right, another Lai jujube, putting out a couple little signs of life here. And the jujubes actually do have thorns. And I worked at a farm about 10 years ago, and I used to harvest the jujubes, and these things can really hurt if you don't know that they're there. But I love the taste of them. Unique fruit. Don't really see them all that often. Though I have noticed a little bit of an uptick in availability at nurseries for jujubes, so it seems like they're finally getting noticed a little bit with home gardeners. Okay, Canadian Harmony Peach here. Looking great, leafing out. I expect the peaches to do quite well here. I do know of a couple other instances locally here where peaches do well. So, but I think those are maybe not even late blooming varieties. So I think, given the fact that I selected late blooming ultra hardy varieties, I think they should do just fine. All right, here's a Reliance peach. Looking good, pretty thorough leafing out on just about all the branches. This one's maybe 3.5 feet tall. Looking good. All right, another Arkansas Black Spur apple, leafing out quite well on all the lateral branches and even putting a couple blooms out, which I suspect that it's just going to take most of my trees a year or two to get synced up with the climate and to time well, because it seems pretty early for them to be blooming, especially since I chose late blooming varieties. But they've only been up here for a month or so, so I don't expect them to be timed all that well with the springtime temperatures. So I suspect and hope that in the coming years they'll be blooming later than they are right now. Here's one of the Red Rome Beauty apples from Stark Bros. Doing great. Also blooming here, but like I just said, I expect in the coming years these blooms to come out later than they currently are. So I have 3 of these larger mimosas that actually were a Dave Wilson variety, or from Dave Wilson, and no signs of life from these yet. And they're actually a little on the yellow side. They were pretty green when I got them. But I do know mimosas grow very well up here. I've seen numerous local instances of them doing just fine. In fact, some of those trees off in the distance, neighboring trees that neighbors have, are mimosas, and they do just fine. So I think maybe these are just going to be a little bit late to leaf out for some reason. And again, another Concord grape planted at the southern base of what's going to be a pioneer tree, hoping that I can train the Concord grapevines up the tree and eventually have bunches of grapes hanging from the mimosa. Okay, here's a frost peach, which doesn't really have any signs of life other than some very tiny little buds on the branches, but everything is green and flexible and looks like it's doing just fine. It's a little on the slower side to leaf out. So here's one of my Chicago hardy figs that I'm a little concerned about. I actually snapped off a couple pieces of it earlier today, and it seems very dry and crunchy, and no real signs of life. So we'll see. I'll give it a few months, maybe replace it if it doesn't come to life. Here's another one of the AC Sweet pomegranates, and this is another one of the ones that came back and forth with me from Southern California up to here, and seems to be in a little bit of plant shock. It was leafed out until a week or 2 ago, and everything kind of turned brown and fell off. It's definitely still alive. It seems to have crisped up and is wanting to get rid of some of the smaller twigs that it has, but it does have some very tiny little red signs of growth in here. Probably a little hard to get on the camera, but I know it's alive, and I fully expect it to come to life here in the next month or 2. So these Chinese apricots from Dave Wilson, the bare roots that I got, are probably the most aggressively leafing out trees that I have. As you can see, it's got a really nice thick amount of leaves so far, and really happy with those. I have 2 or 3 of them, and they're looking really good. They all look very similar to this. Lots of growth here in just the past week or 2. In fact, like just that's all new right there. This thing came just as a stick, and all of that is new growth, so that's really good to see. So here is my one and only mulberry that's not just going hog wild with the leafing, but it's got these little tiny buds that I might not be able to get on the camera. They're just starting to come out, so I think it's alive and doing well. It's just for whatever reason lagging behind all the rest. This is one of the Illinois mulberries, Illinois everbearing. And here is a native cactus that I actually chose to preserve here in this tree row. And these things put out some really beautiful purple blossoms every summer, and I've been intentionally watering it a lot, so it's probably had much more water than it probably ever has in its whole life. And you can see lots of flowers coming on probably more than it ever has. So looking forward to seeing these. I think I seem to recall seeing some bees coming in here and pollinating the purple flowers. So whenever I can and wherever it's practical, this happened to be in a tree row, so not in a field block where I need to get rid of it. I'm choosing to keep the native stuff whenever possible. So here is one of my Siberian pea shrubs actually growing out the top of one of the tree tubes. And it's actually kind of cool because I have seen it grow out the top of this tube just in the past week. When I got here about a week ago, it was a little bit below the surface or the top of the tube here. And these are supposed to be a very fast growing, very hardy, perennial, nitrogen fixing, supposed to be a great pollinator attractor, puts out all these yellow flowers in the summertime. This was one I started by seed on my own, which I had very poor luck with actually. I only had a couple that took, and basically only one that made it to a bigger stage. And I planted it. It was maybe 18 inches tall, and so it's put on a good 2 feet of growth since I planted it. All the rest of the pea shrubs that I have I got from Burnt Ridge Nursery, and they were only about 6 inches tall, so those are in other tree tubes, but they're still only just little nubs down here. So this is going to be the bigger pea shrub this summer, and given how aggressively it's growing right now, I can tell it's going to be getting crammed in here in the tree tube here soon. So maybe next week I might just pull that tube off and then tape it to the stake for wind support. But looking forward to that. And here's one of the what was a potted Montmorency cherry, one of the first trees that I planted here, and this one is starting to bloom out already. And I believe at the base here, that is going to be what becomes the cherry, that little bulb behind the flower. I've never grown cherries or eaten them fresh off a tree before, but really looking forward to it. So until this week, I had been running my well pump off of this big 5300 watt generator. And like I've stated in previous videos, my goal here is to run the entire farm off-grid with solar. That's why I went to the expense and effort of putting in a solar well pump compatible with DC power. I do have power available to me at the street, and when I eventually build a house, I will probably tap into that. But it is my goal to run the entire farm off-grid with solar and battery storage. But due to time and money constraints, since I cannot build my garage, which is going to have the solar on the roof, and will have all my wash pack and cooler, walk-in cooler inside, probably won't be able to build that for 5 or 6 months. Until then, I'm going to be running my water off of a generator, or providing electricity for running my well pump off a generator. This thing is pretty loud and produces a lot more power than I actually need. So I bought this little Honda EU 2200i, and I love this thing. It is so quiet. It's really light. I can pick it up and carry it around with one hand, and I'm really happy I got it. It's expensive, but it also seems to be more fuel efficient, and it's just a great option for me to run my irrigation in the meantime until I get my garage built right here, right around where the tractor is parked. It will have solar on the roof that will then power the well pump and my irrigation, which is going to be my first and most major power consumption item. And then of course we'll power various things inside the garage, like the walk-in cooler and any other appliances or tools that I need to run. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching. That's going to be it for this video. On the next one, I'm going to be getting that irrigation set up, getting my wobblers distributed throughout my field blocks. I'll talk a little bit more about how I chose the layout there. It's going to be a little bit different than what you commonly see on a lot of market farms. Getting those soil amendments incorporated, my rock dust, my soybean meal, my kelp, spraying that molasses to get my microbial activity revved up, getting my cowpeas planted for summertime, which is going to be my main summer cover crop here, about covering the entire farm area. And then in future videos, I'm going to be getting my shipping container installed, building my garage, getting the solar installed on the garage, which will then power everything, getting things off of the generator, getting my post-harvest station set up. And yeah, a whole lot more to come. Give me a comment below. I love hearing from other people out there. Tell me what I'm doing right. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Like this video, share it with other people. And yeah, stay tuned for the next one. Peace.